Hi and welcome back to the channel. I'm sorry I haven't released any videos in a few weeks, but I've been very busy with some big commissions that had taken up all my hobby time, so that's why. But today I'm back and I'm gonna paint a objective marker for my Mordheim board. It's a really nice little sad diorama piece with a dead halfling and a dead horse. So I'm gonna paint that up and show you how. Enjoy! This wonderful mini was part of a Kickstarter by Ye Alchemist Miniatures, and it's sculpted by a guy called Christian of Bjargo. He's really talented and has done a few of these dead characters for role-playing or wargaming. The colors I'll be using here are these. There are quite a few colors for such a small miniature, but I thought I'd just show you which paints I use for different hues, so I don't have to do that all over the video. So you can check back to this part for reference for all the highlights and all the base colors. I could have written a list, but I don't know, I just filmed it instead. And it's quite good to plan this out before you start painting. You can kind of see a palette of what it's going to look like when you have all the colors displayed in front of you, just to get a good view of what it's going to look like, just a little bit. I'm not very good at color theory. I'm just learning about it as I go, and for me it's really helpful to kind of block in the colors before, not just paint one area and finish that. So I'm using contrast paints for shading mostly on this miniature. I prefer them to the old shades because I think they have much more pigment and saturation, and you can dilute them as much as you want, and not a fixed mix that the normal shades are. I started by base coating all areas of the model. I know the professionals kind of used to paint one area at a time and finish that completely, just like Darren Latham does in his masterclass videos. And that's kind of nice to do that. I have done that in the past, but I find it helpful to have all the base colors blocked in just to see if I want to change a color or something, and I can kind of judge how it's going to look. So this one had a base coat of Zandri dust, which is a good pale color for this horse. I wanted to have to be a pale horse. Kind of Johnny Cash reference maybe, or something. And because the ground is always kind of dark in Mordheim, it's a dark stone color, so I wanted the horse to stick out, and the rest of the mini I wanted to have kind of an old school feel to it. You have been watching this channel for a while now. I like old school, so it's kind of colorful, not too much, but yeah, I like to put some colors in there to make it stand out from the ground and from the gaming board, so you can see it. And I was brought up on the 80s, 90s Games Workshop paint schemes, so I kind of like that. So red cloth on the saddle, and just kind of a warm brown tone for the bags, for the leather bags and pants on the halfling, just to give it a nice warm leather tone to it. Just some Cadian flesh tone on the skin of the halfling. I think that's a good base color, unless you're painting maybe dwarfs or something. I think that's a good Caucasian skin color, and this is a Caucasian halfling for some reason. I wanted the green on his tunics to be kind of 2 different tones, so I picked out one slightly colder and darker green for the shirt, and for the upper part I chose a pale warm green just to contrast a little bit. And I think that's kind of the colors of the old Games Workshop Wood Elves, and I think this halfling is kind of a wannabe Wood Elf. The guts got a kind of a dark pink base color. I think that looks kind of good. I don't like it being red. I think it's more purplish, pinkish when you actually see them. And I just put that all over the wounds and all the flesh parts you can see. I think that works kind of good. It's going to be kind of old and stale and rotten anyway, so I think that was a good base color for that. The tail and the hoofs got just a black undercoat of Abaddon black. I think they will be highlighted a little bit more grayish, but it's a good base coat to make them stand out a little bit from the horse, and I think that's a pretty common color combination for horses, to be kind of beige and black. And all the belts and leather straps got a darker leather color from the pants and the bag, just to create some variation. So I used some dryad bark there, which is a kind of a good dark cold leather color. Runnock's hide is a good color also, but it's more reddish in tone, so I usually go this way because it's a kind of a muted leather color that I like the look of it. And it has some nice highlights with Gorthor brown. Some old parchment lying around on the ground there. I just gave them a kind of off-white base color, just to not have them completely white. Some diluted Nazdrag yellow contrast paint was used for the horse, just to give it a little bit more warmth in the tone, and I applied this in a few coats, just a thin one all over, and then just try to put more and more in the recesses. And 2 different green contrast paints were used for the green cloths, one a little bit colder and one with a warmer tone to complement the base colors. And these were put on straight from the pot. I didn't need to dilute them. And snakebite leather, a really nice contrast paint also on the leather parts. It's kind of a warm, almost yellowish tone to it sometimes, but it's nice and works straight out of the pot here also, so it's pretty good. Shyish purple was used to give a more purple tone to the guts. I wanted it to be a bit darker and less reddish. And Gorgrunta fur is a great shade for red. It's a brownish, reddish brown paint, so that works really good. And just some black wash all over the rocks, so to give them a little bit of shading. Highlighting was done with a lot of steps and very, very diluted paint. This way you can just apply it thinly and just with one single. You don't have to mix the paint so much. You can use the shade and then apply it several thin coats, and it will create a good blend between the base color and the new color. So just think about putting this on in a bigger area on the first highlight, and then just create smaller highlight areas. Sometimes I used to do the mistake of just making a too small highlight in the first color, and then there's no room to put the lighter colors, which resulted in me actually not highlighting enough, so I didn't create enough contrast. And that's the hard part, just putting on big chunks of the first highlight. It feels wrong, but it's the only way to go if you want it to look good. So keep that in mind when you start out. Just chunky highlights and then smaller and smaller as you go. And just keep in mind how many highlights you're gonna put there, because in the end you're just gonna paint over the last step if you do too small, and it's just gonna be kind of a white line, and that doesn't look very good. So just glaze over all these highlights, and that's my preferred technique. I'm not a wet blending kind of guy, and I hate to mix paints too much on the palette, so I just find this very much easier, and it looks good. If you thin the paint, it doesn't create a chalky look that you can actually get if you don't dilute it enough. The horse was the biggest part, and that had a lot of highlights and a lot of textures that had to be painted quite carefully. So I took my time here, and as it's kind of the centerpiece, I just wanted it to pop from the ground here. So I was kind of careful, and I went quite high on the highlights, and I wanted it to have a pale look since it's dead. So I just kept going almost all the way up to Wraithbone, I think was the last highlight here that I put on the absolute raised parts and the fine detailed and the edges. And I think with the yellow shading and this kind of off-white highlight, I kind of got a nice rotten tone to it. It's you can imagine the color the horse had, and this is what it's become lying around in the streets of Mordheim for a long time. So keep in mind what you're aiming for when you start. Horses are kind of hard to paint. I've thought through the years it's but this one has so much detail, it was actually easier. It's kind of emaciated and thin, and bones can show through, so it was really fun painting. Otherwise horses tend to be big round shapes that are just almost better to paint with an airbrush, but this one was kind of fun. I really like this sculpt and the other sculpts also from this set. They were very fun and kind of old school Warhammer feel to them. The skin tone of the halfling I wanted to be quite pale, not so pale that it got like mixed up with the color of the horse, so I had to have kind of a pinkish feel to it anyway, but I brought the highlights quite far, and I used kind of a light top highlight color. I think it's Flayed One Flesh, which is a really good final highlight, and I think I actually put some tiny dots of white there. And I'm gonna glaze over this with some blue wash to create kind of a deadish look around the eyes and the mouth, and I can do the same with the horse also. So that's gonna help with the dead look of these guys. But just be careful. Painting faces is really fun, but you gotta be careful not to get the highlights and the recesses. It's kind of easy if you thin them that they kind of run into the eyes or the ears. But just keep a steady hand and don't put too much paint on the brush, and that's gonna be fine. The guts were highlighted with kind of pinkish highlights. I'm gonna wash this all over with some dark red to simulate some dried blood, and that's gonna bring it down from the pink spectrum a little bit, but I think that looks kind of gross and nice. I want it to kind of stick out so it doesn't just look like dirt between the halfling and the horse there. It kind of reminds me of Luke Skywalker being pushed into the guts of Tauntaun in Star Wars. I've had comments about that. I thought they smelled bad on the outside. Also, people think this looks like a drunk halfling getting hungry on the way home from the pub and just starting eating an old horse. I think that's a really good interpretation of this also. So he's just sleeping there, drunk and full of horse guts. But nah, he's dead. He's got some cuts. The final highlight here is Fulgrim Pink. It's really brings out the texture of the wounds, and I think that looks very good. This model has a lot of contrast in it, and it has to because there's so many colors, and it's easy to get a garish look if you have this many colors, but I kind of went for it, and I'm hoping it turns out all right. The red is kind of a standard Games Workshop red highlight. It's I think it's Wazdaka red and Wild Rider red, and then I usually go into the flesh tones. I think that's a good highlight color for red, since orange, I don't like highlighting red with orange or pink. It looks, both of them looks kind of weird. Orange is preferable to pink, but I think flesh tones really look the best, and kind of a neutral red tone, but still very warm in the saturation. So I found that to be quite effective way to paint red. The greens were painted with just paler shades of the same color. Games Workshop has kind of a good range of different greens, and they have nice lighter shades that you don't have to mix white in it or yellow. Red is the same. They have really good steps in the highlights. Blue is worse, and other colors also have kind of weird transitions or no transitions, but the greens are pretty good. So I just went up to Krieg Khaki here, and just on the really highest parts, just to create some edge highlighting there. And just don't overdo it. Use a thin brush, and just keep your paints thin and not too much on the brush. So that's going to create a good result. And this is just practice. Just practice to have a steady hand, and these things get easier. I mean, a lot of guys I've seen on some videos, and if you pick up their miniatures and see them for real, you just can't understand how they can be that good. But just practice, and someday you might get there. I'm not sure I will. Too old to get that good, but I'm not gonna give up yet. So it's you have to see these masters as inspirations. Yeah, you can't watch them and be discouraged and think, I'm not going to be that good. You just have to try and get better. Of course, you're not going to be the best in the world, or maybe you will, but the fun thing is to get better. Just compare your miniature to your last one, and if that doesn't get better, practice. But it's you that is competing with yourself. So that's the fun of the hobby, I think, just to see yourself get better and just compare to the old stuff. Don't look at it and think that it's that you used to be bad. Just look at it and think that you're now very much better. So that's good advice, I think. And this yellow was actually highlighted with this green paint was actually highlighted with a little bit of yellow on the edges, even though it was the cold green. But I thought that looked kind of good to move up to kind of a sunny edge on the coat, and kind of brings everything together. It's cooler in the shades and kind of warmer on the extreme highlights. That can be fun. The parchments or papers were just highlighted with some kind of warm off-white colors to give it a nice old look. It's not like your standard printing papers that are completely white, and this is parchment that's been lying around on the streets. I was thinking about dirtying it down really a lot to make it look worn, but it would kind of disappear in the overall look, so I kept it kind of clean anyway, but kind of off-white. That's a thing you have to think about, realism versus kind of cartoonish style and fancy style. Is you have to pick your battles. You can't just grime everything down and make it look realistic on these pieces. You won't be able to see anything. It's just going to be this. If this was real, this was probably just be brown. Everything, it would be covered in dirt and dried blood and filth, and it would just be a brown pile of stuff. And that's not too much fun to look at. So I'm picking my battles here where I want it to look disgusting and worn, and some things are really clean just to make an interesting picture. And yeah, that's what you have to kind of think about when you paint. The belts, it's always a pain in the ass to paint belts. They're so tiny and you have to highlight the edges of them. But I started out by just giving the whole belt a highlight just to paint the raised areas. And later on I put the edge highlights on the further I go. I think that looks a little bit better, and it's really, really hard to do chunky highlights on edges. It's just maybe on Space Marine armor, but on this kind of tiny detail, you have to just first put a highlight across the belt, and then when you go up to the final highlights, you paint the edges, and that's hard. That's why contrast paints are so good on belts, because it creates that shade and pulls away from the edges, so you get a natural highlight from the get-go. And that's, if I'm not painting display pieces or really doing something advanced, I just kind of paint belts that way. And pouches also, it's really good. So contrast paints can be really useful. Even in a kind of a higher level paint job, you can get away with using just a contrast paint and maybe a tiny highlight on stuff, and people won't be able to notice. So you can cut some corners, especially in army painting. I mean, I used contrast for my Empire army, and that's really fast. I've painted half an army in just a month, and I'm gonna go back to it soon, but been doing too much of this, and no one wants to see me paint 40 halberdiers with contrast paint. Or if you do, tell me and I'll make a video of that, but I won't be able to see my family for a whole weekend, so they might object. Well, they can watch this video and comment and say that I can't do it in the comments. If my family doesn't object, I will make a video of painting 40 halberdiers with contrast paint. Or not. Well, get back to the painting here. The stone and the hooves were highlighted with kind of a muted gray, the Skavenblight Dinge and Eshin gray, which are really kind of almost brown grays that are really nice for this kind of stonework. Sometimes I go the cold way, but this time I wanted to have it kind of a more dirty look, and the highlighting here was kind of roughed in. Stone isn't really clean, so you have to do what you like. Sometimes I dry brush stone just because it's fast, but couldn't really reach the areas here because it's just a tiny rim of stone around the miniature as a frame. So I painted in the highlights, and then I washed the stones with different washes to give them kind of an interesting feel and texture and look, because stones are very rarely the same color, I've found. And that's a mistake that a lot of people do when they paint stone. They don't pick up different stones with different hues. And I don't do that all the time either. I mean, on my Mordheim board, there's so much stone that I would never finish it if I painted every stone a different color. It's just not possible. So that's gonna be just gray. I painted in the metal parts with just some lead belcher. It's such a tiny part that I didn't really highlight it. I just put a dot of lead belcher there. I think it looks okay. And then the blue wash around the eyes and the mouth of the horse and the halfling to kill them off and just not look like they're sleeping. It looks like kind of a suffocated look, and I think that came out pretty good actually, especially in the horse. I didn't think that was going to be that good, but the horse looks really tired with the tongue out. It's a bit sad, this piece actually. It's a bit, yeah, it's cute and sad and horrible at the same time. I really love it, and I'm looking forward to painting the rest of them. They're really sick. Some of them are really fun. The vampire with the spike through his heart, and yeah, they got a skeleton lizard man, and I think someone has been hit by a meteorite or something. I just painted some lettering on the parchments as if it's kind of a contract or something. Just the Darren Latham way of painting text. Just squiddle on some lines and yeah, with thin black paint, and you be fine. Kind of looks really good actually. And maybe it's his will. He was gonna donate the horse to his brother, but the horse died before him, so no brother ever got the horse. I think the last step here is dried blood. I mixed some rhinox hide and mephiston red and with a lot of water, and just dabbed it on and streaked it on and washed it on for different parts, and just creating some blood splatter without going overboard, because that's what I think most people do when they paint on blood. They just slather it on and destroy everything they did before with the paint job. So this is a really careful step, actually, going back and forth and drying off and just trying to get the right amount of blood to look good but not overpower the rest of the paint job. And yeah, just some tiny streaks where it's been running down the legs here of the horse, and use that paint as a wash also, and washed around the wounds to give a kind of a infected feel to them. So just go around until you're happy, and this is a fun step. It doesn't matter that it takes a lot of time. It's just so much fun to paint sores and infected skin, and yeah, those kinds of things are really fun. So this is where you kind of create your narrative on the piece, and I think it looks kind of cool. I'm a Nurgle fan myself, so I tend to like this kind of stuff, painting boils and pockmarks. It's really fun. The last step here was just to ease up the fur around the hooves, and this is the finished piece before varnishing, I think. You can see the halfling there lying serenely but dead. And here's the finished piece in all its bloody glory. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and like and subscribe if you enjoy this channel, and I'll keep giving you stuff. If you like to see something special, give me a holler and I'll see what I can do. Bye!